Hey, what's up, guys? It's Jace, and welcome to another exciting episode of the ELAV8 podcast. Today, Sam and I invite guest Ron Dawson to come on to discuss his journey in the film and entertainment industry, working for companies like HubSpot and Frame.io. He discusses his evolution with his faith, as well as we touch on his book, Dungeons and Durags.
If you're starting a business, you can't avoid having some kind of investment in marketing to help that business go, especially if you're starting from the ground up. This industry is just slow when it comes to technology. And so that's what I've noticed in the video business, that they're slow when it comes to catching up with technology. So now we're in the AI world. And so getting them on that tip is hard. Getting them to understand what you need to do in marketing is hard. Movie Magic scheduling was based on DOS. Okay, for those of you who don't know, DOS looks like code, basically. This is what it looks like.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is Sam Messman. I'm doing the intro today because I've known this guy for a while. I'm here with my co-host, Jace Sparks, but today we've got the one and only Ron Dawson. And what I have to say about Ron is his bio is similar to mine in that it is completely all over the place. Author, filmmaker, content marketing genius. I think editor there has spent some time there. OG from Frame.io. The list is endless. But Ron, how are you? Where are you? You're some combination between HubSpot genius now and author. So what's the official update? Because it's been a minute.
Yeah, for sure. First, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure chatting with you, Sam, and nice to meet you, Jace. So I'm currently in beautiful Culver City, California. And my current day job, as they say, by day, I am basically the principal brand and content strategist for HubSpot for startups. So there's a division of HubSpot that's geared towards startup founders to help them networking, raising money, put on events, things of that nature. And then, so I create content around that. So that's my day job. And my night job is, I don't know, pissing off evangelical Christians on TikTok. Maybe. I don't try to, it just kind of happens that way. But,
everybody needs a hobby, Ron, and we're going to touch on that because I'm very curious as to, so in a lot of ways, this is vigilante justice, I guess, in some capacity by night. But let's start with the boring part first, but also maybe the interesting part for the people that I think is authentically healthy for many of this audience to listen to, which is I know tons and tons of founders who are very marketing challenged, and they don't, and actually staggeringly, even in, my industry, the video industry, they are intensely marketing challenged for the most part, which is bizarre because they make media, and you would think that would somehow connect the dots into successful content marketing strategy, and yet rarely does it. In fact, most of the time people are like, well, let's just go light a few $100,000 on fire at NAB and IBC and call it a day. And we did our jobs, so that's so you work at a company that is not designed for that. In fact, I would say it's a very modern approach. And I'm curious, for the startup founders and people who are getting companies going out there who've been looking around at CRMs and some of the other ones, HubSpot is I would say the most modern. But what's your 50,000 foot pitch on that for people as to why this matters for them?
Yeah, I think if you're starting a business, you can't avoid having some kind of investment in marketing to help that business go, especially if you're starting from the ground up. You're creating a brand from scratch. You're trying to sell. So your go-to-market strategy, which is just like, how do you get this product to market? Or if it's a service, how do you get that to market? What are all the things you can put in place to make it happen? What are all the processes you're going to create? How is this going to scale? There's so many things to think about, and marketing is a big part of that. And I think in the media industry, one of the things that I've noticed is that, and frankly, we saw this with the with the strikes that happened last year and all the conversations that are happening in the industry. I've seen this in the industry ever since way back in the day. I worked at a company called Screenplay Systems, and they were the makers of Movie Magic. And so if you're in the film and video business, you've probably heard of Movie Magic scheduling, Movie Magic budgeting. I worked at the company that originally created it. And so way back in the day, I worked there.
Wow.
No way. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, I was...
that's blowing my mind. The reason why that's blowing my mind, I want to hear more about this, is people don't know. Yeah. I think that company was sold for $15 million, and now it's worth... Close. Yeah, and now it's worth what, like $3 billion? Its valuation? Like, it's one of the biggest like valuation increases in private companies in like the entertainment history.
Right. Well, it's been a minute since all this went down, so I think I can talk about some of this stuff. So I was back there. This is going to give away my age a little bit, but who cares? I talk about my age in my book, so I don't know why I care. But anyway, so I was back there in the 90s, and I was there for almost 6 years. And by the time I left, I was VP of operations. But me and the director of marketing there, his name is Otter, who now works for, I want to say, not cast and crew. He works for like one of those now. Long story short, he and I basically took that company to the next level. And the owners of the company, their original product was Scripter. And what Scripter did way back in the day, it would take like a Word document and allow you to make it formatted correctly for a script. Because at the time, there was no standalone screenwriting products like Final Draft. And so Scripter kind of like started the industry like in the early 80s or whatever. Company kind of took off, and then they created Movie Magic scheduling, Movie Magic budgeting. Became industry standard. If you've watched anything you watch on television or see the movies, use a scheduling or budgeting, and at one point Scripter. Then Final Draft came, and they kind of changed everything. And for the longest time, me and my buddy Otter, who were at Screenplay, were like, we got to get on this standalone screenwriting thing because this is where it's going. And it took us the longest time to do that. It took us the longest time. Movie Magic scheduling was based on DOS. Okay, for those of you who don't know, DOS... I don't even know if people even know what DOS is anymore. If you're old enough to know what DOS is, DOS, it's like when you watch a sci-fi movie and you see people typing, you see like, DOS looks like code, basically. This is what it looks like. So this is before Windows came out, but scheduling made DOS work like Windows before Windows comes out. And this is what's crazy. I can't remember his name, but like a very famous venture capitalist went to the owners of Screenplay Systems. This was before Microsoft Windows came out, said, we love this product, scheduling. The fact that you can make DOS work like a Mac is amazing. We want to buy whatever. They don't want to buy it. They were too into the movie business, whatever. Every time I hear that story, Michael Dorr, I think is his name, is the venture capitalist who was there. He was one... and every time I hear that story, it just drives me crazy. So anyway, I say all this because working with companies back then, to get a studio to move up to the next version of anything was like trying to turn an oil tanker. It was crazy. The industry just lags when it comes to technology. And eventually... there was this company called Creative Planet that came, and they made this offer. They ended up buying out scheduling and budgeting. There's a whole drama. We get together with the managers who used to run Screenplay. Sometimes we get together and we talk about things. One of the guys who worked there ended up at Marvel. I don't know if I should say his name, but he ended up at Marvel, and he's doing quite well for himself right now. But it was just like this drama. But technology, this industry is just slow when it comes to technology. And so that's what I've noticed in the video business, that they're slow when it comes to catching up with technology. So now we're in the AI world. And so getting them on that tip is hard. Getting them to understand what you need to do in marketing is hard. I remember back in the day when I was a videographer, I started out doing weddings, as a lot of videographers do. And I was like one of the first videographers to get into blogging, because videographers did not want to blog. Nobody wanted to blog. This is back when blogging was still kind of new and fresh and hip or whatever. So I was one of the first videographers to do that. So I was always kind of like ahead of the curve when it came to the video industry. And I've just noticed that this is an industry which is odd, like you said, Sam, like technology is at the core of what they do oftentimes. When it comes to their toys, they're great, but sometimes getting them to use the technology that can advance how their business runs is not so good. And that's something that I've noticed. I feel like you talked a lot.
Jace, before I turn this over to you, I also have to say Ron has massive street cred when it comes to this, especially on the marketing side. One thing you probably should know, probably the best content marketing blog that ever existed was for Frame.io, and Ron started that. So Ron has had like a tremendous you've actually been at the forefront of like 3 massively impactful companies at this point, or at least that I know of. There might be a few others that you haven't talked about, but if it's Movie Magic, scheduling and budgeting, hugely impactful in the industry, Frame.io, massively impactful, and now HubSpot. So it seems like you know how to pick them. Has HubSpot had an IPO yet? What's going on?
Well, it's funny. I mean, with Screenplay Systems, I was just kind of lucky because the guy who hired me, my buddy Otter, he and I both went to Cal, and at the time I was working as a real estate appraiser, and it was right when I was learning filmmaking. I was like taking filmmaking courses at De Anza College in Cupertino. I was working as a real estate appraiser, and I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I was into marketing, and we met at a party, and he says, "Hey, I need some help in marketing." I met this company, Screenplay Systems, and it was like a dream job. It was doing I started doing marketing, so doing marketing for Screenplay Systems, and it was just so cool because at the time, sometimes celebrities will come into the office to buy Movie Magic, scheduling, and budgeting, whatever. Sometimes we'll get guest passes to like the studio, like Paramount or whatever. So that was always cool, and so I just got lucky there, and then when Screenplay Systems kind of sold off scheduling budgeting, I actually left the industry and went up north to Intuit. So I worked as a business development manager for the Quicken division of Intuit, and I did that for a couple of years.
Another nothing company.
Yeah, this little company. They make a product called TurboTax. But I worked on the Quicken side, and then after doing that a couple of years is when I started my video business. And then again, Frame.io was kind of a lucky thing. I was going to travel as a digital nomad, and so I needed something that I could do remotely. And so at the time, Frame.io was really just starting their blog. It hadn't really gone anywhere, and they were looking for a writer. I said, "Hey, I've done a lot of writing," because by then I had written for a lot of different photography and video blogs like Zacuto and Planet 5D and all these others. And the dude who hired me said, "Ron, with your experience, we'd actually like to bring you on as an editor." And so I became the editor of the Frame.io blog, and then I became the senior content marketing manager after a few years, as I expanded the blog. And the way I got hired at HubSpot was kind of similar in the sense that when I left Frame.io, I started my own content marketing business. I was doing successful. I started it right at the beginning, literally at the beginning of the pandemic, March of 2020 or February of 2020. So when I left Frame.io, and I was like, this is not going too well. But by fall of that year, I was doing well. And then a year or so later, and I would always get people reaching out to me on LinkedIn saying, "Hey, we like your experience." And I always say, "Thanks, but no thanks." This is where I started doing some work for you, Sam, at your old place. And I don't know if you're allowed to say it, so I don't.
Fine. No. Yeah. Carry on. Ron and I did a whole bunch of stuff over at OWC together.
Yeah. So, but then a HubSpot recruiter reached out to me. And then, when a company like HubSpot reaches out to you, you kind of listen. But long story short, they actually, the original role that they were hiring for was kind of below where my skill set was. And I was kind of like, this is kind of like below me. And basically, they increased the role to bring me on. And so I got hired at a higher level than they were originally hiring for. And it's been a great ride ever since. HubSpot's an amazing company to work for, and I've been really lucky.
Oh, man, my mind is like literally blown right now. And I, like Sam knows this about me, and I'm just getting to know you, but like I'm a hybrid engineer / creative. Like, you know, I code, but nice. I also like edit. So I'm talking like, so I have a word for this. My favorite movie of all time, believe it or not, is Blade, because I love just that concept of being a daywalker. The metaphor of that is like, you know, someone that can operate within, you know, both worlds, and meeting someone that's like a hybrid, like yourself, like that has a complete understanding of technology and is able to distill it in a simplistic fashion. Right. It's just like, I mean, it's so awesome hearing your work and what you've done. I know Sam is probably nerding out inside because he sees like how I think. It's just like, I mean, like I'm thinking specifically about, like, how do you do that? How did you learn that skill set? How did you learn to become this person that could simplify information that is so complex and make it entertaining for people to want to participate within these companies? I just find that so interesting.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it stems from the fact that, like I was a business major, undergraduate business major at UC Berkeley. I was always into business. Like I remember when I was in high school, my parents were in Amway, and that's how I first got interested in business, because my parents were in Amway. We wanted to be like Diamond Direct or whatever it was. It was crazy.
How far up did you get in the MLM?
Oh, I think we got up to Direct, not that part.
Okay.
Like the very first before we left. But Amway's a whole nother. You need a whole other.
We can get off. We'll get off the Amway train.
Yeah, but I got interested in business, and so in high school I was doing business related stuff, and so I got a business degree at Berkeley. So I was always interested in business, and so there was that side. But I was always a creative person, always had an active imagination ever since I was a kid, and so I think the combination of those two things is kind of what contributed to that. And then, you know, working at Screenplay Systems was a company where you worked your left and your right brain a lot, you know, doing the marketing for that, thinking outside the box of how we could do it. Because at the time, the big event was, I'm going to call it was the something Expo, LA Expo. I can't remember right now, but it was this big industry expo, and we would always do that. But we would do it in a way that was a lot less expensive than, you know, the way we would do the booths was very cut and dry. And so coming up with creative ways and on how to do that. So I think that's kind of like how
I'm gonna disagree with you, Ron. Actually, I actually don't think that's what it is. I actually think it's because you have an entirely different alter ego, which is actually the far more fun part of the whole thing. So Ron is also a self-published author and podcast host, and is actually a creative human in his own right, but maybe similar to me, he rarely talks about that when he gets on the technology side of things. He's like, oh, I'm going to shut this part of my brain off and pretend that part doesn't exist. But that's actually the part that I'm really interested in. And so my observation of you, Ron, is that actually you're just a creative person in a field with non-creative people. And then when they let you drive, good things happen.
I mean, it sounds like it.
I like it. I love that observation, Sam, because that's actually very insightful, because I even remember when I owned my own video business, whenever clients gave me the budgets to let my imagination run wild. I remember I had this big photography industry related client. They were like a vendor for professional photographers. And I remember they had this big yearly conference that they would do, and I would frequently shoot it. They had a new CEO, and he wanted me to create like a keynote video for him. And I remember I made this crazy pitch. I said, I want to do a pitch where I interview creatives talking about the creative process, but I don't want to interview any photographers. And they were like, what are you talking about? Like, we market to photographers. Why wouldn't you integrate? Because I don't want to interview any photographers, because once you start interviewing popular photographers, and back then there was this term rock star photographer, there were a lot of photographers in the pro photography industry who were like internationally renowned. They were famous wedding celebrity photographers. And this company had connections to all of them. And I had made videos for a lot of these kind of people. But I knew once you interview them, they came with, for lack of a better word, baggage. Like you were going to put them in a particular hole. But if I interviewed a creative director, a painter, a filmmaker, and an audio, like a musician. I knew if I interviewed people complete outside of the industry, there would be no associated baggage, but I knew there was going to be similar themes because they're creatives. And that's exactly what happened. And we created like this 3-part series and they loved it. So whenever I've had the opportunity to really spread my wings, I get to do that. And it happened at HubSpot. Like literally my first week at HubSpot, I said, hey, I have this idea of what I want to do. I want to do this documentary film series, and we are not going to talk about HubSpot at all in the film series. We are just going to show what it's like when a startup founder tries to become a unicorn, which is a private company worth $1 billion or more. And wanted this to be an authentic editorial style documentary that is not a commercial for HubSpot. And long story short, my boss liked it, but he didn't know I didn't have the budget for it. We had an internal partner in LinkedIn, and we pitched it to LinkedIn, and we were going to have LinkedIn do one season, and we were going to have Microsoft do another season, and then have like AWS or someone else do another season. LinkedIn liked it so much, they were like, we want to do all 3 seasons. And so we did this great collaborative documentary series of LinkedIn and HubSpot for startups. And I feel like when I'm given a lot of rope, I'm really allowed to shine, and a lot of the crazy ideas I have can come out.
I have a random question associated with everything that you just talked about, because I find you so fascinating. And it's like, what do you do when you get bored, right? Like what process happens inside your mind? Because I mean, you're so successful and you're doing so many different things, right? Like, so when you do get bored and you don't have that inspiration that's striking you to make a podcast, to create a video, or to design a business, or to help tell stories, right? Like, what do you do?
Oh, watch television and movies. Hands down. That's like my favorite pastime. And I say it with no shame. I mean, part of me feels like, oh, it would be better if I like to go out and hike or whatever, but I like what I like. And so I love watching television and movies. In fact, I was married for 17 years. My ex and I had an amicable divorce. I'm in a relationship with a new woman who, for 4 years now, she's amazing. But she's always teasing me because I think, and my book is like this too, like I think in movies and television, like I always have like some type of movie or television analogy for something. And sometimes she laughs and she rolls her eyes.
Hey, Ron, I think at this point, though, just sorry to interrupt you, but I do think you're going to need to tell Jace and the rest of the audience what the book is about, because they probably
I really want to read it. Like I'm going to buy it the second we get off this call.
As soon as I tell you this, you'll understand the book. But on my first date with my current girlfriend, we met during the pandemic. So our first in-person date, we were going out. We almost had like this, Until Sunset type of date. You know that movie, Until Sunset? It was kind of like that, where we just walked around Altadena, and I took her to all my old stomping grounds when I was a kid. And then right before our first kiss, I said, why don't we pretend we're like in a romantic comedy? If we were in a romantic comedy, what do you think the audience is thinking right now? And she had this look at me like what the fuck are you talking about? Thankfully, we're still together, but she's always teased me about that. But
also a very bold move, because that's risky, Ron.
Yeah, I'm a total. That's why my handle is Blurred Runner. Blurred is a black nerd, and I like the movie Blade Runner, which is, you said Blade. I almost thought you were going to say Blade Runner, but that's okay.
Yeah, I prefer Blade Runner, to be honest with you.
I grew up in Texas. All right. There wasn't a lot of like selection where I grew up. Right. And that I had that VHS, right? I had that VHS and it's all I basically had. And so it was on repeat nonstop. It's like, because I thought Wesley Snipes was the coolest action hero of all time. I was like,
you're pretty cool.
Yeah.
Was being up and work. So my book, and you'll understand my book when I tell you. So the name of my book is Dungeons and Durags. And one black nerd's comical quest of crisis of faith and identity crisis and crisis of faith, something like that. And it's about my journey as a black man living my adult life in a predominantly white world and then reconnecting with the Black community. And so it's a satirical, I describe it as a satirical memoir. I wrote it during the middle of the Trump presidency. So there's a lot of things going on for me related to that. At the time, I was a devout Christian. And then so I was having a lot of personal angst with the evangelical church's support of said president. And so that's where the book, there's a lot of part of the book that is political commentary on that in a very satirical and funny way. But the other part of the book is very actually, very self-criticizing in a sense, and is a way to engage of what does it mean to be Black in America. So in the book, a guardian angel in the form of Sam Jackson comes to Earth to help me be Blacker. And the yin to his yang is the voice of Morgan Freeman, just the voice, speaking down. And so a lot of the book has these chapters where I'm interacting with Sam. So like the opening chapter is sort of like, starts in media res, where obviously my character and his character already know each other. They establish the fact that we've already had some kind of relationship going on. And in the book, I'm watching Pitch Perfect because I really like the movie Pitch Perfect. And he's like, I'm just going to say it. He's like, nigga, are you watching Pitch Perfect again? So this is how he's talking in the book. And we get into this whole thing about a Black man. The whole first chapter is about the problem of a heterosexual Black man liking Pitch Perfect. He was like, don't you have any problem that they're singing a whole bunch of songs made famous by Black folk, but they ain't got no Black folk in that movie? And I said, what are you talking about? There's no Black person in that movie because there's like one Black woman in the movie. And he's like, nigga, I ought to shoot you just for saying some dumb shit like that. And so that's the kind of interaction that I have with the Sam Jackson character. And there's one, but these interactions are used to basically engage with what does it mean to be Black in America. So one of my favorite chapters is the chapter where Sam and I get into a conversation about the F word. Because for the longest time, largely coming from, being a Christian, whatever, I didn't like to cuss, didn't like to curse. And I remember the first time I said the F word, the first time I said any kind of bad word, it was at a babysitter and she heard me because the kids told me to say shit. And I had never heard that word before because I was raised by a very Christian Southern Baptist mama and we didn't talk like that. And so the kids told me to say it. I said it. The babysitter heard me and she washed my mouth out with soap. And so I think subconsciously that is what was causing it. So in this chapter with Sam, he's talking about the fact that at the time I like to say frack instead of fuck. Because as you know, the nerds out there know that frack is the equivalent of the F word in Battlestar Galactica. Yeah. And so in this particular chapter, Sam is getting on me for saying frack. He goes, sometimes, frack the police, just don't cut it, if you know what I mean. Sometimes you just got to say F the police. But he says, and I'm talking about how, because he's saying he's an angel. I'm saying, well, you don't sound like any angel I've heard of. And he goes, how do you know? Because angels don't talk like that. And then the Sam Jackson character says, well, how would you know? Where does it say that an angel can't use language like that? And I said, then I quote some verse from the Bible. And I said, and he says, to a baby, the F word sounds like any other word. The only reason why it's bad is because of the meaning that we put into it. And then so throughout the book, there's these kind of conversations about, okay, what does it mean to be Black? And then I have these, basically, he says I have to confess my Black sins. And there are these chapters where I confess my Black sins to Black pop culture icons. So there's a chapter with Snoop Dogg where I confess to him that I like culturally appropriated music perhaps more than I should. Because I tell him I didn't hate Taylor Swift's version of September. I didn't think it was great, but I didn't hate it. And so we get into this whole thing about what is it like? How can a Black man not like that? There's a chapter with Spike Lee. There's a chapter, one of my favorite chapters, where I confess to Viola Davis that I never dated a Black woman. I've gone out with Black women, but I've never had a relationship with a Black woman. And then get into that. So, and then the last third of the book goes a lot into how my Christian faith impacted a lot of the kind of decisions I made in life that I'm not necessarily proud about. and then the book ends with me on trial for my black sins. And my Don Cheadle's the defense attorney, and Blair Underwood is the prosecuting attorney.
Oh
and
my god!
It's really fun. I think it's genuinely funny. Everyone who reads it laughs out loud, and so that's what the book is like.
So when are you gonna adapt the screenplay? Like, I'm seeing it in my head. Like, this sounds incredible.
I'm actually working with my creative partners. We're working on trying to get an animated TV version of it made now. So we've been pitching it for the past couple of years or so. Not like as much as we could, but we have a contact now that we think can move it to the next level. But yeah, it's funny you say that, Jace, because everyone when I talk about it, that's what everyone says. Like, oh my gosh, I can see this, I can hear this. And I think one of the best like compliments I've gotten from the book, people who read it, who said, these characters sound exact. I totally picture Sam Jackson. I totally picture, Snoop Dogg. they totally picture all these black pop culture icons coming from a guy who's a self described Oreo, which, from the black community, someone who's black on the outside, white on the inside, we didn't know that. But, I always joke that I code switch when I'm with black people, which again, I don't know what the racial makeup of your audience is, but code switching in the black community is when, you talk one way when you're with the brothers and the sisters, and you talk very proper and differently when you're at work and with your colleagues at work. So that's code switching.
I feel like
but I would say
flattered, Ron, that on this podcast we seem to be blurring the lines just a little bit, which I'm enjoying.
Yes.
Can you do the rest of this podcast as if you were talking to the black community?
But that's what's funny, because this is how I talk to the black community.
Okay.
And then, like on my podcast, my two co-creators I told you about, my two best friends, JD and Yolanda, who are both black. We have a podcast. We did it for a year. It's called Dungeons and Durags, and a big part of the podcast is them making fun of me about all the stuff about the black community I don't know. And like how I talk and teasing me and stuff like that. So, but I definitely have gotten more comfortable with communicating, because I used to be very uncomfortable around black people, because I used to be teased for talking quote unquote white. I don't have like that deep, very white type of voice. Like if you didn't know I was black, you probably would not. Like if I didn't tell you I was black, I don't know if your listeners would know that I was a black man. And so that's something I've always lived with my entire life. And so I used to be very self-conscious around other black people because of that. And, because of my age and because of maturity, and because I've learned to be among black people who can love other black people for who they are, like my two best friends. One of the things I love about them is they have accepted me for who I am, despite the fact that they grew up predominantly with black people and, went to SC and had predominantly black friends. And now they have all these like famous black people in the film industry. Like one of their best friends was like the showrunner for Insecure and stuff like that. So they're a cool group of people, and it feels good to feel comfortable around black people again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just realizing how authentic you are, right? And it's kind of a through line for like the last two episodes that Sam and I have been talking about is authenticity, right? And so like what I'm really like loving about what you're saying is like you're staying true to your authentic self. And I kind of want to talk about that and unpack that a little bit. Like, you grew up one way, right? And you've evolved your authenticity as you've gotten older. And as you say, quote, I've matured, right, into yourself. So I just want to talk about your authenticity and how you always maintain that. And like what really drives that, and why is that a tenet of your identity?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking me, because I think that's something that's part of my brand, so to speak. One of the things that, one of my friends, Yolanda, she's one of the co-hosts and co-creators, and JD's wife. One of the things she really appreciates about me in the book that she said is how authentic I am, how I'm willing to, this book is very critical of certain types of people, but it's also critical of myself. There are things in that book where I address issues that were, that I was dealing with at the time, issues that impacted my marriage at the time. And so being willing to kind of like call myself out on that. I learned a lot from my female friends, my women friends. I remember I created a podcast called Radio Film School. I think this is how I first connected with you, Sam.
Yeah, I was originally back in the day. I was a guest.
Actually, unpack that for a second. We can't just gloss over it. I always find this interesting.
We can totally gloss over it.
What, I want to know, how did you guys meet? Like, he had to have met you to invite you on the podcast.
No, I think because I was looking for filmmakers and people who were doing things in the film world, and it was Sam's film organization that works with filmmakers, and so I brought him on to kind of like talk about that. And Radio Film School I described as This American Life for Filmmakers. It was an audio documentary style podcast versus like a one-on-one interview podcast. But I remember when I released like a preview of it, it was like a 12-minute preview, and I thought it was really cool. It had all these great sound bites and sound clips from the interviews I had done. And I remember this woman filmmaker emailing me saying, "Hey, Ron, I really love the podcast. I heard the preview, sounds great. But I noticed you don't have any women filmmakers." Didn't even occur to me that I didn't interview any women filmmakers, because apparently there weren't any women filmmakers back then, I guess. But I remember thinking that and saying, wow, and feeling kind of shame and feeling like, that's crazy. So ever since then, like I did a series called Breaking the Glass, a special series on the podcast where I made a point to interview women filmmakers and women executives. And in the process of doing that, there are times where women friends have like called me on my shit. And one of the reasons why I feel so comfortable, for instance, calling, my white brothers and sisters on white privilege, which again, I always like to say, having white privilege is not bad. Denying it is. We all have privilege. Many of us are in demographics that have some kind of privilege. As a man, I have a type of male privilege that even trumps some white women's white privilege, depending on the situation. And so I learned a lot from my women friends who called me on my male privilege. And I would, like the privilege of just being able to walk in a parking lot at night with absolutely no fear. Or to be able to go jogging out in a neighborhood with no fear. Before 2020, I didn't used to have fear jogging in neighborhoods. It's changed a little since 2020 for obvious reasons. But for the most part, I don't have fear jogging because I used to go running every day, no matter what time at night with earbuds on. Most women don't feel comfortable doing that. So those kind of little things. And so it's in the process of learning that and being open to that and being open to change. And I feel like I've always been the kind of person who's been open to critique and criticism if it's coming from a place of love and it's coming from a place of making me a better person.
So I want to unpack that, and I want Sam to come on this because I know you caught this. I saw your eyebrows go up a couple times, and it's about criticism, and it sounds like your biggest critic, right? I'm my biggest critic. I know Sam is his biggest critic, and I want to know more about how critique and criticism defines you both as people, right? And since So I'm going to start with Sam on this one first, because I know he had a question as well. So I want to make sure he gets it in. But Sam, how does critique affect you and how does that drive your process?
Well, here's the thing. I think most people, and I think I've evolved. I think I used to be a lot more thin-skinned than I am. I'd be very hard on myself, but I wouldn't like it when other people would criticize me, mostly because I'd be like, yeah, but what about all the other things? And I take it less personally now. I don't take anything personally anymore. I don't care. We live in a society that's so absurd at this point that it's just literally I try and decide for myself, is this a valid criticism? Is this not a criticism? The hardest part about any human being, very much myself included, and I've learned this in a visceral way over the last 10 years, is nobody is fully self-aware of their blind spots, because if they saw their blind spots, they would not have the blind spots. So for me, I view a lot of this in criticism as being a detective for where I am failing, because I know once I address those parts of myself, usually things tend to improve, and the movie of your life tends to like take a jump in the positive direction once you stop making the negative decisions that you continually make in your subconscious endlessly. So that's my there's some deeper aspects to that. It's epigenetics, right? So that's my epigenetics has made me welcome criticism, I guess, is my answer. Ron, the floor is yours.
So the question is, how do I look at criticism, and how do I become the kind of person that likes it? Is that essentially the question?
Well, I mean, you've said you've been very like open, which I very much appreciate. Yeah. But you've literally said at least 2 or 3 times on here is that you were very hard on yourself, right? You've said that, and right. How that like transforms your thoughts on things, and how it I'm imagining it transforms your ability to do your job. Because one thing that I'm certain of is that you're a hard worker. Right. And I know personally is that when I'm sitting and I'm not doing anything, I'm very hard on myself. I was like, I could be doing more. I could be doing this. I could be doing that. So I really want to get into the core of how your self-criticism has driven you to be where you are today.
Yeah, I think, if I'm being honest, I think that for the longest time, I was the kind of person who wanted to be liked, actually. Like, I didn't like it when people didn't like me. It was very hard to do or say things that would get people to not like me. And I think I had a lot of self-reflection when I was going through the last 2 years of my marriage. You know, the last 2.5 years of my marriage were both the best and the worst times of my marriage. And, you know, a lot of that is private to my ex and I. I had no problem talking about my contribution, and a lot of it was on me. Part of it was like undiagnosed ADHD that impacted the marriage in the early years. And then when it was diagnosed, me not really doing what it takes to manage it properly, which further impacted the marriage. And so, and if anyone, you know, who has studied ADHD, you know, if you're in a relationship with someone who has it and you don't have it, sometimes you feel like you're in a relationship with a child just because of how forgetful they are, or whatever it is. And so that's really hard, you know, particularly for a spouse. And so the therapy that I went through and the counseling that I went through, both that we did as a couple and then I did one-on-one, as I tried to become a better husband, that had a profound impact on me in terms of how I look at life, how I look at truth and integrity. I was the kind of person who, like, I was not the kind of person that would like lie or anything, but I was the kind of person who would not tell the whole truth if I could avoid a fight, or not tell the whole truth if I could avoid something else. Learning not to do that anymore. Learning to, I often tell people, don't ask me what you want to know about something if you don't want, if you don't mind, if you don't want to like hear the hard truth of what I really feel about it, because I'm going to really tell you. And so
let's pause there. Because I want to now, I was waiting for this moment to redirect the conversation, right? So the wanting to be liked, I can relate to a lot of this, but in the end, you know, I think where I've found that I enjoy things the most at this point, and like, you know, it used to bother me that when people didn't like me as well, but now I almost a little bit am fascinated by it when people don't like me, and on top of that, what I really enjoy most is being able to have an authentic conversation with somebody that I disagree with, or and exchange information, right? And be able to unpack that. And you can't do that if you're constantly people pleasing all the time. So Ron, I'm now opening the door wide open for you, because we talked earlier about like, hey, this veers off and it goes into weird places. Now, as we all know, racism and the political situation in this country has completely fine now. Everything is totally good. And your relationship with evangelicals is never been better since the book came out.
Never been better. Absolutely.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So, you know, I had been a devout Christian definitely my entire adult life. In my childhood, there was a period of 10 years in my 20s where, as I see in the Christian world, I wasn't really walking with the Lord. I still believed in God, but I wasn't walking with the Lord, which is code for I was having sex outside of marriage. And although I was more of like a monogamous I was more like a serial monogamous. Like I didn't sleep around a lot. Like I usually had like long-term relationships, that kind of thing. But at the end of that, funny enough, it was like a crush on a woman that got me back into the church. And so I went to the church that she went to. And it was like the first time as an adult where I kind of owned my faith as an adult. And it wasn't just from my parents. And so for for 2 decades after that, I was really devout in my faith. I was what you would call, I was into apologetics, which is a defense of the faith. So I was the kind of person who would try to defend a belief or a faith in Jesus Christ and how and why you could do that. But I was always a compassionate Christian. Like I was always the kind of person who, I don't think you would have described me as the way evangelicals describe today. I would never say I fit that. I think a person would always say that Ron is a loving, caring, compassionate person. I cared about people. And frankly, I think, a lot of why I am today, for a lot of people who end up leaving faith, they left their faith because of their compassion and empathy for people. And so that's, when, like I said, the evangelical support of Trump just people who I thought I knew were saying and doing things that were just blowing my mind. And
Do you think he's not
I thought
devout?
I knew these people. I'm sorry?
Do you think he's not a devout Christian?
I doubt it. I really, there's something about him that makes me wonder. I mean, I know his favorite,
the Bible up really well, though.
Right, and I know his favorite chapter is 2 Corinthians, which, for any Christian in America, you don't say 2 Corinthians, you say 2 Corinthians. Although, ironically, I heard in Europe they actually do say 2 Corinthians. So maybe.
So anyway, he's been dealing with the European Christians then. So that's probably.
Well, I mean,
exactly.
His wife is European, isn't she not? So actually, maybe.
I have to talk about this because I'll forget otherwise. Did you know? And I had a really interesting theory about why he's selling Bibles.
Oh, I want to hear this.
Well, what's your theory?
So I heard that the reason that he's selling Bibles is so that he can essentially money launder political contributions from churches. And so the churches are buying Bibles to funnel money into his campaign, and so that it can be on the up and up because churches are allowed to buy Bibles.
That's crazy.
Not
crazy. I mean, when he was selling his digital baseball cards of himself.
Oh, his NFTs. Yeah,
NFTs. When he was selling that, the price was set in such a way so that when he sold out, it was just below the threshold for when the tax, for when the government would tax you a certain way. So yeah, I mean, all of that is planned. But anyway, all that, going back to your original issue and point, I kind of got to this point where I was having this struggle with my faith and almost feeling like I was let down by the church in a sense. And, long story short, I eventually got to a point where, I didn't believe anymore. But I feel like in so many ways, I'm so much more of, I wouldn't say I'm a more compassionate and loving person, because I think, like I said, I think it was the compassion and empathy that I had that led me, ironically, out of the church and out of my faith. But there are things that I would do and say back when I wasn't Christian because I felt like I had to, because that's what Christians were supposed to do. Like, here's an example. When I was a wedding videographer, I got a gig from a couple. It was like Chris and Jen. Chris had emailed me saying, "Hey, we're my wife Jen, and we're getting married. We're going to do a wedding." I was excited. I just assumed Chris was a guy. Well, it turned out Chris was a woman. This was a lesbian couple. And I, at the time, very politely turned them down, and I, referred them to someone else. Because I felt like it would be an affront to God for me to make a wedding video honoring and edifying this relationship that I believe at the time God thought was a sin. And so, I think the kind of things that I believed and did to people, not that I did them directly, but that I felt about certain people or felt towards people was caused by what I was told, like, God thought was right or wrong. And I know now there are progressive Christians who are completely gay affirming. So it's not like you can be a Christian and be totally gay affirming. I know gay Christians. There are plenty of Christians who love Jesus, who love the Lord. So I didn't lose my faith because of any kind of social issue. I legitimately lost my faith because I just no longer believed what was in the Bible anymore. I'm what you call an agnostic atheist, so I'm open to the fact that there could be a God. I just don't think, for me personally, that it's the God that we see in the Bible. And so I started to ask the questions that was before afraid to ask. I started to read the books I was afraid to read, and I started to gain a kind of knowledge. When you start actually learning about the Bible, that's why a lot of people who go to seminary end up losing their faith, because there's a lot of things they don't teach you in church that you learn when you go to seminary, about like how the Bible was canonized and what the original words mean and all these kinds of things. And as I started learning about biblical scholarship, reading books and listening to a lot of biblical scholars on TikTok and on YouTube, listening to a lot of podcasts by biblical scholars, my mind was just blown. And the more it was blown, there were things like I just realized, it took me actually 2 years to actually say it out loud. I think the last 2 years before I actually made it, I probably actually stopped believing. But like spring of last year is when I said, you know what, I really don't think I believe this anymore. And so I love connecting with Christians who are passionate about their faith. I'm not the kind of person who wants people to lose their faith. A lot of my TikTok content is just challenging people to think critically. A lot of my TikTok content challenges some of the really harmful things that are in the Bible, and to say, hey, if you're a Christian, there are things you can believe that don't have to align with some of these really negative things. And so, and that's why I joked at the beginning, I piss off evangelical Christians, because it's not that I tried to, but I think a lot of Christians worship the Bible and they don't worship God. And if you do anything that condemns or criticizes the Bible, it's almost like they take it personally. And I think, that's something I think people have to wrestle with personally. But I come across so many Christians who are beautiful people, who I think are great, who have this really free and open way of looking at the Bible. They don't see the Bible as inerrant. They don't worship the Bible. They worship God, and they believe in the God of love. And I love it. I respect that. And I like those kind of people.
Jace, you go first.
Jason.
I thought it was really beautiful what you said, and I just want to know, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, it's a personal question, is that if you could talk to Chris and Jen today, like, what would you say to them? If you had an opportunity to speak to them.
I would just apologize. I would say, hey, I don't know what the F I was thinking back then. I would love to see your wedding video. Did you get a video? I would love to see it. If you ever want to do a love story or an anniversary video, I'll give you one on the house. That's probably what I would say.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, right on, man. Oddly, like, I think you and I had like totally inverted paths, right? I started
really
as agnostic, right? I'm fairly certain about God at this point, but I would agree with you that it's not really the one being espoused. So the question that I actually have for you, right, is, do you feel that you lost your faith because of the hypocrisy of the things that you saw, or was it because your ideals got shattered, or was it because you just think there's nothing?
No, that's a great question. And so I recently finished my manuscript for my second book. It's sort of like a sequel to Dungeons and Durags, and it's about my deconstruction journey. And my journey actually started in 2011. Like 2011 was the year where I started having questions. You know, at the time, my wife at the time, she was hit by a car, and all the physical elements that resulted in that started me questioning. That was the year that Rob Bell's book Love Wins came out, and it blew up the Christian world because Rob Bell was a hero to so many Christians. Then when he wrote that book, he became the Antichrist for a lot of Christians, because essentially in the book, he kind of implies that a universalist mindset, which everyone goes to heaven. But I remember reading the book, and at the time, really deep in my faith, thinking 90% of what he's saying here is on point for Christian doctrine. This other 10% where he kind of suggests that maybe we all might go to hell, might not go to hell. It's like, why would that make you upset? So anyway, that started me questioning. So to get to your answer to your question, the hypocrisy that I saw in the church, all these things I was dealing with, I think those were the fuel that kind of exacerbated the journey that I had already started. But I can legitimately say that, because I could have, if I still believe, I could have stayed a progressive Christian. I could stay the kind of Christian who believed in a God that didn't do all the bad things that we see. But for me personally, I think what legitimately got there was, because I always even describe myself as an intellectual Christian. Like, for instance, I never really believed that the Adam and Eve story was a literal story. And many Christians don't. I was kind of 50-50 on the worldwide flood thing. Again, many Christians don't see those as literal stories. They see those as metaphors or analogies, or they have a different meaning. And so I was always more of the intellectual type. And so I think that hypocrisy and everything kind of fueled all those questions I had, so that when I got to the point where I was studying the Bible more intently, I was able to say, well, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't believe this. And then, so it was a true intellectual leap. Like, you can't control what you believe. A lot of Christians will talk about, well, you choose not to believe. You can't choose what you believe. Either you believe or you don't. And I stopped, once I started learning all these things, and I no longer had the motivation to quote unquote please God, or I no longer was afraid of hell, I could say, okay, if I take all that aside, if I was intellectually honest about how I think about these certain things, do I think it's true? That is where I said, I don't think it's true. And so I hope that answers your question. So long story short, the hypocrisy and all that kind of stuff was the fuel, but what actually made me lose it and lose faith is such a weird word, because in a way I still kind of have faith and hope that there is something out there, which is why I'm agnostic. Like, but I think if there's a true God of love, one, I definitely don't think he's sending people to hell. I don't think he is a he. I mean, he transcends gender. And I actually personally think that if there is such a being, that being is probably indifferent to what happens on Earth, to be frankly honest. Like, if, when you think about the vastness of the universe and how crazy it is, to think that any entity that actually created all this would care about what two people of the same sex do in their bed, or would care about whether or not what kind of clothes you wear, or whether or not you eat shellfish, is just ridiculous. And I personally don't think such a being would necessarily care about this particular aspect of the creation. But if this being is the embodiment of love, then that being would care. And I think whatever happens on the other side of this life, that being will take into consideration the kind of life that everybody led, personally. And that's my hope. So there's a part of me that kind of hopes for that, but I don't have any expectation, and I feel like I have a certain sense of freedom of not having kind of baggage that I had when I had all these really strong dogmas on my back.
Jace?
This is one of the, the few podcasts we've had where I literally just want to listen. Like I'm just taking it all in, and you don't always need a response, right? I just want to take all the learnings I'm getting from Ron today and just appreciate them. That's the honesty I have for you right now.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
well,
I appreciate
I could go for another hour with you because I think now we're starting to like
easily.
Maybe when I book to come back and talk about it.
Yeah, look,
I love
2.
that. Yeah, and I'm gonna read your book. This is a promise I have. I both Sam and I are avid readers. I'm gonna read it, and like whenever the next book comes out, I'll be ready for you. I'll be ready to talk about all the Samuel Jackson lessons I've gathered from it.
Well, it's cool. So this year, 2024, there are like 4 significant milestones or anniversaries this year that are somehow connected to my book. So my book is Dungeons and Durags, which is obviously a play on Dungeons and Dragons. This year is the 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons. This year is the 30th anniversary of Pulp Fiction, and the Sam Jackson character in my book is based on that. This year is the 20th anniversary of Kill Bill Part 2, and the Viola Davis character chapter takes place in the church from that movie. I use that as the setting of that particular confessional. And then this year is the 25th anniversary of The Matrix, and one of the characters from The Matrix shows up in the book as well. So I thought it was cool. Like, there's all these anniversaries that are tangentially related to my book.
Oh, I can't wait.
Here, Ron.
Yeah.
So here, we're gonna make a deal. When you put the new one out, you got to come back, and then we're gonna continue this conversation because I have some counter arguments for you at some point. I don't need to be right. I just think it's fun. So, I
love to hear them.
We can go all the way down the rabbit hole, see if we come up with the meaning of existence that we can agree on. And
that sounds awesome.
I love that.
And in the meantime, it's just great to see you, man. It's been too long. I know I'm not seeing you in person, but thank you for coming on. And I think this is probably the good stopping point because I think the next one is when this really kicks into ignition. But honestly, so happy for your success, and thanks for taking the time for us.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Yeah, nice talking to both of you, and same to you. Much success with the podcast and everything you're all doing.
All right, cool. Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode. Sam, give us the close, the absolute close.
The close that I have, my big takeaway from Ron, is stop caring what people think and go your own way, make your own decisions, get to the bottom of whatever you're doing, and you will come out the other side significantly more satisfied, at peace, and comfortable no matter where that lands.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. We'll catch you here next time on the ELAV8 podcast. Peace.